This is Brad Kick. I'm the co-director of Crosshatch Center for Art and Ecology, and I'm coming to you from the dark, recording this just after the first new moon of 2021 on the eve of Martin Luther King Day, and coming to you with this quote to start from James Baldwin. Life is tragic simply because the earth turns and the sun inexorably rises and sets, and one day for each of us the sun will go down for the last time. Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have. It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide indeed to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. One is responsible to life. It is the small beacon in that terrifying darkness from which we come and to which we shall return. One must negotiate this as nobly as possible for the sake of those who are coming after us. But white Americans do not believe in death, and this is why the darkness of my skin so intimidates them. I feel called by that incredible quote from an incredible essay called The Fire Next Time to believe in death. I feel called to believe in death and to negotiate the small beacon of my life as nobly as possible. And so I bring this to you to welcome you to this film premiere of Plague Phase, which is, at the end of the day, a film about believing in death. And I'm so grateful that we have this opportunity. Us folks at Crosshatch have the opportunity to work with the good folks at Nature Change and Joe Vandermeulen and Anne-Marie Oman and Bronwyn Jones, who have produced this shoestring budget, very small but a very powerful short film. And when Joe invited me to view the film and offer my thoughts on it and possibly to work with him on this, to work with this team on this, what I saw immediately that we got so excited about was this incredible use of poetry in particular, of art as a whole, but poetry which really shines in this moment. And I'm going to turn this light up. Which really shines in this moment to help us, especially us white Americans, to believe in death and to confront difficult truths about grief and loss and the impact that we have because we are willing to sacrifice the beauty of our lives. So I think you're going to find some beauty here, and I hope you'll stay with us through this premiere and join us after for the commentary and the live panel. So to tell you how that's going to work, give you the real quick rundown of that. Starting now and during the film and during the commentary post-film, there's a chat window that's open, and we invite questions and comments and conversation there. And we hope then to pull from that to inform the live panel that's coming at the end. So you're going to watch a 17, 18 minute long short film, and then you're going to watch a number of folks from our local community comment on the film, which they've seen already, and those comments are pre-recorded, and then we'll go into a live panel around 7:45 or so. Before we get started, I of course need to say thank you to so many great folks who have made this film happen or are helping to get it out to more eyes and ears and minds. And that's the folks at the Traverse Area District Library and Old Town Playhouse, Title Track, especially the co-directors Seth Bernard and Holly Bird, who are with us in commentary or on the panel, and the folks at Nimiac, and the folks at Traverse Area Media, who've helped with a lot of the technical support. And you may be watching this on that channel, of course, in which case you won't be seeing it live, but you will be seeing a great recorded version of everything that happened. Incredible actors, poets, and artists involved in this project, and incredible commentators and panelists involved. So grateful for all of the folks who came together to make this happen. And Anne-Marie Oman is going to take it from here. Thanks, folks.
Welcome. I'm Anne-Marie Oman. Thank you for being here. I echo Brad's gratitude to our sponsors. Thank you, Brad, for your generous support and crosshatch wisdom, and to Joe Vandermeulen of Nature Change and all those who will speak today as we enter this conversation. This was a small, volunteer, no-budget project that came together in the midst of COVID, and given those constraints, we hope it is merely a beginning, and that in the future we may be able to deepen the approach and widen representation. After viewing this short film, Plague Phase, several people will offer post-show commentary, and there will be time for questions. Please stay on board for that. I also want to acknowledge the pod behind this. First, our production team, Joe Vandermeulen and Bronwyn Jones. Joe was both psychic force and cinematic art maker behind this project and working on very short notice in pandemic circumstances. And he was the inspired person who first asked, what do the poets have to say about Plague Phase? Bronwyn Jones has been calming advisor, vivacious spirit, hardworking techie, and dear friend. I am also indebted to Norm Wheeler, fearless leader of the Beach Bards, for his contribution, and I am particularly grateful to the poets who generously created and presented these elegiac poems: Keith Taylor, Catherine Turnbull, Fleta Brown, Jen Sperry Steinnorth, and Bronwyn Jones. Thank you for your mind-expanding lines and for lending your imagination to the quandary of Plague Phase. May it be the beginning of many. Also, immense gratitude to the very talented sister team, Ren and Phoebe Walters, who provide the narrative thread and stand in for the future generations who will grapple with Plague Phase issues even more than we do. Also to their mom, Ashley Walters, thank you. Much gratitude to the author of the article, Plague Phase, who inspired this work, William Reese. And finally, a very special thanks to Bill Allen, the sculptor and artist who provided the studio and all the art objects. His 2- and 3-dimensional art is the visual expression of one of the film's questions. How do artists, and all of us acknowledge the debris, enter a more sacred grief, and perhaps, this is one of Reese's driving questions, alter the narrative, even adapt or adopt an entirely different story. When Joe and I read Reese's paper, his claim that endless growth cannot be sustained became a deeper source for our artistic reflection. And his economic studies reinforce the severity and certainty of the failed path humanity is on if we continue to follow a narrative of endless growth. The film you see is about attempts through commentary, poetry, and sculpture to visualize our mutated future, to address brokenness, and then through humble conversation and real activism to imagine a different story. Thank you, and welcome to Plague Phase.
The human enterprise is in potentially disastrous overshoot, exploiting the ecosphere beyond ecosystems' regenerative capacity.
This is not the time and place for dreams. This is the time to wake up. This is a moment in history where we need to be wide awake.
Those are the words of an ecological economist, William Rees, and of a child activist, Greta Thunberg. 20 years ago, when the 9/11 Commission report was published, the authors cited, first of all, our failure of imagination. That single line haunts me, because in light of the data Rees provides in his science-based article about ecological economics, we as a species and ecosystem are moving beyond regenerative capacity. And in the light of Greta Thunberg's statement to be wide awake, I have to ask, what is my purpose? What can artists contribute?
We can't save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. Everything needs to change, and it has to start today. Greta Thunberg.
The world's best hope to avoid collapse may be an unavoidable and ultimately staggering ecological disaster to strike soon at the heart of the developed world.
In this project, a group of poets and artists propose a small act of resistance to use our words, mind, metal, imaginations to envision what we would all prefer to deny, a future where we are no longer able to regenerate.
Everything is held together with stories. That is all that is holding us together. Stories and compassion. Barry Lopez.
The economic paradigms that run our lives are made-up stories, complex social constructs, conceived in language and massaged into accepted theory. The world is in thrall to a mythic construct of perpetual material growth.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time.
How do we change the story?
What would the new story be about? How about once upon a pandemic? That's real. Okay, well, think about our world. Like our world without something. Like something that we love. Like butterflies? Oh yeah, okay, butterflies.
So the question we ask the poets, what creature, now perhaps merely threatened, but likely gone within a few years, what lost creature would break your heart to live without? We invited them to use their imaginations. Let's start with those butterflies.
The last monarch. Suddenly, there was a summer without monarchs. I'd seen monarchs clustered in small trees on the north shores of large lakes, waiting for a night breeze to carry them across. So many butterflies on one tree that it bent almost to the ground. And then a summer without monarchs. And I'd walked one September beside another lake littered with the broken orange wings of monarchs caught in storms trying to cross. And just the October before, I'd seen one monarch lonely on a baseball field, flying south. But still, suddenly, one summer without monarchs. And then, the fall.
So the monarchs are gone?
Well, we have a wing, see?
What about snails? In the old books there were snails.
I saw a picture once, the last of the Hawaiian tree snails. His name was Lonesome George. He died on New Year's Day, 2019. Scientists had been looking for a mate for him for 10 years. They never found one.
Well, then what good is science?
They might bring him back. They took part of his foot.
His foot?
For science, I gave up a bit of my foot. It's frozen now, in case one day I can be cloned. It's nice there were so many binocular-bearing humans in the rainforest, scouting the trees for another of me. But I used to wonder why I wasn't allowed to look myself. In a lab I was bred, my dinners brought to me, snipped and still, when what I wanted was the feel of living bark under the foot they took a piece of for science.
What about frogs?
I found a frog once. It was the color of a ghost.
Are there still frogs? I'm little, but I remember when it rained.
They would sing.
Are there still some singing somewhere?
Ghost frogs. If there were ever a day for frogs, this is it. Lake's Edge in spring, the place where logs lie just where I left them last year, and the ghosts of the multitudinous frogs of my youth are croaking from the unknown, from the transformations, from the alien slime with their splay feet and pop eyes, and whose singing is indistinguishable from my mourning that may be coming through the semi-permeable nature of their skin. Once I shot frogs with my granddaddy's BB gun, and we fried up the legs. Frogs are carnivores too. Life is mutual eating, but sometimes I feel myself eating until there is nothing left but howling desert, which I spell dessert. And when I have finished that, and my kayak is stranded in the middle of nothing, a few small peepers, oh please, start up to show me I cannot devour everything.
Okay, no frogs. What about birds?
What about condors? They're huge.
Or trumpeter swans?
What's the most beautiful bird in the world?
One who would match the sky.
But what if we've never seen a blue sky?
That's a problem.
Imagine to be the blue of sky and fly.
The indigo bunting. I want a world where every year there are more indigo buntings. More of us, our flicker of dusk, chip of blue against blue, that deepening splash against sky. When there are many, both of us grow elegantly more blue, sky and bird. To imagine a world without our blue flight slashing dusk is to imagine a world without the necessary variations of wonder. Humans hold funerals for their beloveds, but not for us, not for the lost indigos, not for the sky within sky that will no longer sing. It is your loss too. When the last of we buntings no longer rise, what feathered hope dies in you? When the sky that we are fades away at last, neither sky nor blue will be true.
What about the water? Is that gone too? It costs a lot now. Only rich people have it.
Weren't there ponds once also?
If there were ponds, there was water. But is it free and clean?
Adore. Adore the word pond. It has soft sides. It's still like heart, closes like time. It doesn't contain flood, can't be broken with a sigh. A pond would fit inside my palm if palms could hold like eyes.
So if the butterflies are gone, and the birds, and the snails, and the frogs, and the ponds I live in, what about the mammals?
Yeah, mammals. Like cats and dogs and other stuff.
Like us?
Do we survive?
Only some.
But without the others, without the creatures like otters.
Once, the decaying apple trees in the near orchard bent and knuckled down toward the seeding tall grass of summer. The great stalks surging upward into the barked, increasing elbows as blown hair against the puckered mouths of burls. Sometimes, back then, our minds could settle into the quiet, receptive as a pond surface still and open to the sky. In such a moment, they came as a lucid dream, running into our gaze, breaching the waves of grass, brown curved backs of shining fur rising and falling. He knew they were river otters, the last 3. How? I asked. Pictures, a film clip long ago, he said. We were struck by the seeming joy of their movement, rippling bodies, stitching air to light, land to water, wildness to mind. Then they were gone. We didn't try to follow them into their burrows. The tunnels deep in the banks arched over the stream, a scarf of fresh water curved as an arm around the orchard, or into the spill of stream water itself, pouring lakeward. I regret this. Who knows what took them? Coyotes, microcystin toxin, traps set with the hope of pelts. They are long gone now, and the hard surfaces, glass, metal, mirror, that compel our busy, restless gazes, stare back empty no glisten of living fur, bright eyes, prints of webbed feet between the blades.
To change the way we exist, we have to change the story we believe, that resources, growth, profit are endless.
Humanity is now standing at a crossroads. We must now decide which path we want to take. Greta Thunberg.
What if we kept hope? About what? About the debris. What's left? What if we use it to make something? To make amends. What's amends? It's a way to go on.
To go on? We don't yet know how it ends, but we're looking at possibilities. We're imagining how to transform the holy debris.
We cannot, of course, save the world, because we do not have authority over its parts. We can serve the world, though. That is everyone's calling, to lead a life that helps. Barry Lopez.
And that's where you come in. We hope this work, these poems, this art provoked by a small degree the possibility of a new narrative. And you're in the conversation. Let us not fail the power of imagination ever again.
Thank you for joining us for the live premiere of Plague Phase. And this is the part of the program where we are joined by a number of commentators. So these are pre-recorded 3 to 5 minute perspectives on the film that you just watched. Because this is also pre-recorded, I don't know what order these are going in yet, but I'm so glad that we're joined by Stephanie Mills, Jamie Delp, Seth Bernard, Anne-Marie Oman, and Leslie Ty. And then after that, we will move as seamlessly as possible into a live panel where Holly Bird and some of the commentators will be joining us as well. You can continue to leave questions, comments, any thoughts, perspectives in the chat, and we will pull as many of those forward as we can into the live panel discussion. Thanks again for joining us.
I'm Anne-Marie Oman again. Thanks for watching and welcome back. As you know, we opted to use William Rees's research as the jumping off point for Plague Phase. Rees points out that even economy is a mental construct based on a narrative many believe that says we can go on growing forever. One of his points is the absolute necessity for a different understanding of what growth is or could be, a degrowth movement coupled with an entirely different narrative. If we're to have a future that's worth living, we need to dramatically reduce our ecological footprint and seek a different kind of growth and development. To that end, a little bit about process. One other title I considered was Holy Debris. I mention that because in many ways the ethos or the aesthetic, if I can call it that, of this script is about First, acknowledging and then beginning the work of transforming the debris of loss into the rudiments of a different story, drawing on both ancient and futuristic sources. If this path, this story so devastates the natural world that what we are left with is the debris of extinction, how on earth do we now adopt a healthier tale? Could we use this poetry of mourning first to honor what is lost, and then to integrate grief and give a liturgy of the heart to specific creatures we may never see again? I don't know. But these are the questions that drove me away from the pure howl toward poetry, my own and others, that might ritualize my keening. I am late to the call, of course. We are not the first, but I hope in some small way we might further the language, heighten the text, channel, elegize, shift in our seats, move the needle a small degree toward a different manifestation. Imagine, if we cannot comfort, can we bring awareness to the narratives that trap and destroy? Can we imagine how to move toward reimagining? I hope Plague Phase is a contribution to many such efforts for artists of all walks. Thanks for bringing your imaginations to the conversation.
Hello friends, Seth Bernard here, co-executive director of Title Track. I really appreciated the film. I really appreciated Plague Phase. One of the things that really struck me was the paradox of the way my body and my mind felt looking at beautiful artwork and looking at visual art, creativity, sculptures, and the way that the shots were set up, and then that's juxtaposed with just the devastating and sobering content of the conversations, and these are conversations that we need to have as individuals, families, communities, at our workplaces. The reality of living in an age of extinction and the acceleration of climate change and ecological collapse is something that some of us live with on a day-to-day basis and some of us avoid on a day-to-day basis. And so a way of looking at the video that I think could be helpful for folks is sort of welcoming sobriety in the 21st century, sobriety of thought. And we're able to sort of shop around for a reality that suits us in the digital realm that we have increasing reliance on and access to. And so while this is convenient, it's incredibly distracting, and it has posed problems that at the moment seem almost impossible to solve. And yet we have access to solutions and to models and to tools to build community resilience and to circulate solutions, to circulate understanding that can then lead to solutions on a local level that are meaningful and that are created from the ground up in a grassroots way. Another thing that struck me as an artist, as a musician, is just how much I lean into my creative practice as an antidote to the doom and gloom of taking a sober look at science and ecology and the collapse, sort of this exponential growth curve, this S curve that we see of the collapse of ecological systems, financial systems, currency, to sort of have, for me, a creative practice as a way to process my feelings and interact with the world is just a huge it's a huge boost for my spirit and for my heart. And so to have those elements present in this film felt nourishing and nurturing. So there were things to sort of visually resource with as we digested beautiful voices from our own community, sharing poetically a shared reality that is based in science and fact. One of the things that I felt would have been wonderful to see more of and hear more of, and to have present in the film, is Indigenous voices. And there is a lot of Indigenous leadership in Northern Michigan. In white majority communities or families, we often find ourselves sort of cut off from Native communities and Native voices. And so that to me was something that was also present in the film, was the absence of Indigenous voices, particularly because Indigenous peoples have lived with and in the solutions to so many of the existential crises that we as settlers, colonizers, don't have a cultural inheritance of in this construct of society that we live in the United States as a colonized land. White majority communities are here, but we don't have access to cultural tools to live in reciprocity with nature, but Indigenous communities do. We don't have the cultural tools to grieve what we have lost and the trauma that we have endured, but Indigenous communities do. And so a lot of these solutions have been here for tens of thousands of years, and now is a great time to return to them. We have choices to make as individuals in that regard, and so this film was a reminder to me to keep waking up, as I sing to myself in one of my own songs, to wake up and keep waking up, and to make it a practice to seek out art and creativity that is resourcing and informing and also sobering.
I'm just very pleased to be connected with this project because it's beautiful and it's truthful and inspiring, and has an element of grave, good sadness, which I think is appropriate at this moment in our human occupancy of the planet. The question is, how do we go forward? And in a way, I think how we go forward is by paying attention to the deep past and to people who knew how to live in place for a good long time as part of a community of beings. And in our area, in our home place, that means Anishinaabe. And we see that they've used every bit of intelligence and wisdom and commitment to maintain a connection to place and a connection to ancestors and a commitment to the future, and a connection also with other beings. And that sensitivity to the beauty and singularity of other beings is eloquently expressed by the poets in this piece, and needs to be sung and shouted and prayed and murmured continually. We need to do everything we can to reestablish
those connections with all our relations. And the good news is that there is a passion for restoration, there's a passion for regeneration everywhere. And even if we can't save every species that's in peril, if we try to save their situations, their habitats, if we try to save them where they are and where we are, we will discover things that will surprise us about the regenerative capacities of natural systems. We'll also have to make sacrifices of comfort and life ways, actually, because as the video also mentioned, the mythology of unending growth on a spherical planet is it's an epistemological error that's enormous, and we're all caught up in it, and we need to find ways to get out of it and into a sense of continuity and stability and to going forward in some kind of perpetuity among the sacred debris.
One of the challenges that I think is facing theater makers and filmmakers, speaking as someone who comes from those two disciplines, is just how do we cut through the noise? How do we connect with that audience to even engage in those conversations? Because there's so much pain and, loss and trauma right now that it's just much easier to go to, those little moments that make us escape, those animal videos, those just things that bring us joy. And so how do we engage in these really important conversations? And I think this is where actually Plague Phase and what it's doing and the way it's doing it in this hybrid form is going to be able or can be able to engage an audience in that content. Because it is drawing from all these disciplines. So it's involving poetry and language and imagery, but also aspects of visual arts, not just in that there are these beautiful sculptures, but actually in the way that it's put together and thinking about movement and color and lines and how it's being pieced together, and as well as, music and musicality and sound. And I think that as a hybrid form and in general, you can think about theater and film as both being inherently hybrid forms because they're pulling from all the other disciplines. That right there is going to help draw people in, because you might be, really interested in the visual aspect or maybe in the language aspect, but you get there. I think for me, what's also really important is this notion that we start out with in Plague Phase, which is the failure of imagination. And I think even as artists, we sometimes have a failure of imagination. If we are only ever looking backwards, if we're only thinking about where we've come from, kind of building on things, which is important, we are failing as well because we're not thinking about the future. We're not projecting forward. We're not moving things in a new direction or thinking about the direction we want things to go. And I think we have to do that too. And for me, one of the really compelling things about this particular piece is that I do have those moments of getting just really caught up in the beauty of something, in the description, in the language of the poetry, in the images, or just really kind of entranced. And then suddenly I'm reminded the real dire issues that are at the heart of it, and the notion of these things that are really precious to us that we love. Those same cute animal videos, like what happens when those are the only last remnants of an animal? What happens when it is gone and all we have is that, right? And how horrifying that is to think about. So I think that as we're looking ahead, I think that we have to engage in those hybrid forms and think about how all these different pieces of, the way people experience or get drawn to or get, entranced with art, how are those going to speak to people so that then they're there with you and then they can have that moment of, oh my gosh, I see what this is trying to say, and, we need to do something about it. I think that, again, if we're only ever looking back, we are going to find ourselves where we're at right now, which is in a point of no return. And so, again, it's really up to artists to kind of remember that imagination, not just like the stuff we're creating, but how we're creating it or how we're going to bring an audience in for that shared experience so we can have that conversation.
Hello, friends. I'm Jamie Endell. I am a writer, a lecturer at the University of Michigan. Let us not fail the power of the imagination ever again. As I watched this film, one of the things that struck me was the return again and again to imagination as key to not only our survival, but to the survival of otters, monarchs, birds the color of blue sky, too. I think that sometimes we, human beings, think of the imagination as something that only children or novelists or filmmakers really possess or offer up so openly. Perhaps many of us think of imagination as something more private, either naive fantasy or melancholy apocalyptic ponderings. One of the things that I love about this film and that I find so important is its example of the power of communal imagination, of imagining together, or the power of art to speak on behalf of a feeling so many people have, and in doing so, unite our abilities to come together. When we can imagine something outside of our immediate lives, that's the space where compassion and empathy are born. It's also the space where a call to action is born. If someone else can imagine with us, that's art at work. In small communities or globally, that's where change begins. There's a line from Carl Jung that also kept resonating for me as I was watching this film. Nature is not matter only, she is also spirit. For me, that spirit is absolutely alive in these poems and these images, even as they are grappling with a future absent of what one poet describes as the necessary variations of wonder. The spirit of nature must be very much alive in us now, in the year 2021, to feel so much pain as we imagine collectively what a life void of wilderness could possibly look or feel like. We've already seen too much disappear. To lose much more is to lose it all. It's a dusty, eerie, lonely life to imagine, but it's what this film has asked us to imagine together as a community. The makers of this film know that we are at a breaking point, that until we feel that pain collectively of a future that is irreconcilably dead, we won't know how to change the story as a collective, as a global community. Art, in this case, is giving us the glimpse forwards into a very real possible future so that we can return to the now and use the power of our imaginations and the action that imagination inspires to heal and to live vibrantly instead. Art, in this case, is being used to ignite our imaginations, our better angels, to work together as a hopeful, action-oriented community of human beings. This is the only way to change the narrative. This film had to be made so that we can unmake it for a unified, brighter future. Thank you.
All right, let's see if we've got sound now. I know that folks should be able to hear me at least. Sorry for what we missed there. Here we are going for a mostly seamless transition. So I know folks can hear me, but Joe, will you talk for just a second and see if that's coming through as well? Okay. Joe, I'm going to finish introducing you, and then we'll see if... Yep, okay, we're good to go. So Joe Vandermeulen, one of the producers of the film, is a filmmaker and writer, works with nonprofit organizations in northern Michigan to publish the online multimedia magazine Nature Change, with degrees in English and creative writing, earth science and hydrogeology, as well as a PhD in natural resource policy. He has served as a nonpartisan science advisor to the Michigan legislature, as well as the director of LEA, a nonprofit community planning and media organization. And now you all saw Anne-Marie Oman there for a second, but you didn't get to hear my bio. So I'm just going to quickly say that she's the instructor at the Solstice MFA in creative writing at Pine Manor College, author of several books and several plays, including the recent Michigan notable book, Lake Michigan Mermaid, A Tale in Poems, co-authored with the poet Linda Nemec Foster. And Anne-Marie's the founding editor of Dunes Review and the former president of Michigan Writers. She lives near Empire and makes regular appearances at writing conferences throughout the country. And so grateful to be joined by Seth Bernard. Seth Bernard's a songwriter and recording artist with 13 solo albums and a dozen more collaborative projects. I think collaborative is right at the heart of everything Seth does. He founded Earthwork Music back in 2001 and in 2018 launched the Clean Water Campaign for Michigan. He's been a long-time iconic leader and steward of Michigan's music community and is now co-executive director of Title Track. And Jamian Delp is here. Thanks for joining us, Jamie. Jamian's the nonfiction writer, poet, and founder of The Dreamer's Desk. Her works appeared in Orion, Mid-American Review, and Bridge, among others, and her essay Purely Michigan was included in Elemental, a collection of Michigan nonfiction, which received a Michigan Notable Book Award. She's a graduate of the Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan and now teaches in the English Department Writing Program at the University of Michigan, including cross-disciplinary, collaborative upper-level courses focused on environmental and social justice, exactly what we need right now. Thanks, Jamie, for joining us. And Stephanie Mills is with us here live as well. For nearly 50 years, Stephanie Mills has been writing and speaking for nature and community. A longtime bioregionalist, Mills was launched into prominence with her 1969 Mills College commencement address, The Future is a Cruel Hoax. Her most recent book, On Gandhi's Path, Bob Swan's Work for Peace and Community Economics, is a biography of Robert Swan, a war resistor and colleague of E.F. Schumacher, in crafting the means to an economics as if people mattered. Stephanie Mills is a fellow of the Post-Carbon Institute and was featured in the 2010 PBS documentary Earth Days. Her recent writing, which appears on the naturechange.org website, extols the work of natural scientists and the organisms, ecosystems, and watersheds to which they are devoted. And Holly Bird, thank you so much for joining us. Holly Bird is descended from the San Felipe Pueblo, Yaqui, Apache tribes, and the English Isles, and has a long history of community activism in both environmental and indigenous issues. Holly maintains a private law practice in Traverse City and served as the civil ground coordinator for the Water Protectors Legal Collective, the leading legal service at the No Dabble Camp, the protests in support of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and she is also co-executive director at Title Track. Thank you all so much for joining us for this live panel. I'm wondering, first of all, before we jump into both the comments and questions from Facebook and some of my own, if anyone, Holly in particular, would just like to jump in with any initial thoughts. Oh, geez, and I missed Leslie. My goodness, I'm sorry. Before you do that, thank you. Leslie Allen Ty is an instructor of creative writing and film and new media at Interlochen Arts Academy and a playwright, director, and producer. She co-created Mashup Rock and Roll Musical and is a volunteer and member of the artistic committee at Old Town Playhouse. And I'm so sorry that I scrolled past that. I'm so glad that you're here. Thanks, everyone. Holly, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, because we didn't get a chance to get a pre-recorded commentary for you, I would just love to hear any initial thoughts that you have. Yep. It sounds like we are working on audio. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Yep. Yeah. Folks, go ahead and unmute and. But nobody's getting through except for me. And that's only because I'm talking into this mic. That's slightly embarrassing. I'm sure we're not going to lose any views in the moments while I'm figuring this out. Let me see. Let's try this now. Folks, go ahead and talk again.
Can you hear me? Testing. Coming through. Welcome back. Sing something. Hello, friends out there.
Mr. Watson, can you hear me?
Ground control to Major Dan.
That's a good one. Yep, I could hear on Facebook. I have it open on my phone.
Woo!
All right, okay.
Great.
Holly, and assuming folks can now hear me, Holly, thank you for your patience, everyone. Please recap if you don't mind.
Don't worry, I've been on whole national fundraisers that had to get, because of technical difficulties, had to be rescheduled entirely. So don't worry, this is a blip. So thank you for your kind introduction, Brad. As I was saying before that, I'm very thankful for all the work that everybody's done on this, and the heavy subject matter is very touching and moving, and as was the delivery. And one of the first impressions I had was that there were no people of color in the video. And my second thought was, but that would be really accurate because people of color are disproportionately affected by the changing climate. And I was relating back to my experience with the No DAPL camp at Standing Rock, where this is part of the case. We're often victims of what I call ecocide, which is a form of genocide, but ecocide meaning our land bases or the areas where we live are considered to be less valuable than others, and are often subject to sort of that industrial complex and its ills. So we only have to look to Flint for us to see that here, and we have that unfortunate example. So we can look at Detroit as well. I mean, we have so many areas up in the UP with some of the mines that we have that were affecting indigenous land, and where there was a public outcry and no action. So as unfortunate as it is, that's a very real reality, would be the disappearance of people of color as well. So, but I also did want to hold up and lift up. There were statements made regarding Greta Thunberg and some of her comments, and I wanted to point out that her comments were actually the direct. She kind of took those comments directly from Chief Arvil Lookinghorse, who is a Sioux leader, and in fact, what is one of our medicine. He's the holder of the sacred white buffalo calf bundle. So in Lakota and Sioux culture, he carries the most important artifact in their religion and culture as a bundle, and it's the original bundle. So his words have great import, and I know that they met and they got together, and he actually gave her a name, which was really beautiful. So there was a lot of influence there, and I just wanted to lift up and raise that, because I think, as Seth had mentioned before, those Indigenous voices do need to be heard and lifted. And so Greta was doing that, which I think was really beautiful and appropriate. Sometimes we don't know that that's happening unless we know those sources, and I knew those sources, so I wanted to bring that up as well. But I do think it's time for us, we all live here together. We all have pain in our hearts from what's going on, whether you left your homeland and came here, or you were subject to encroachment, or we were subject to encroachment by those that came. But the fact of the matter is we all live here together. And that healing needs to take place with all of us. Once we are able to heal our relationship with the earth, no matter where we are, on the earth, a lot of things will follow after that. But it really centralizes to that. We can't have a relationship with the earth that is poor, or that is non-caring and simply for our use, without harming ourselves and without harming others. I take some issue with the word stewardship even. That implies that the earth is ours to take care of, when in fact it's really the other way around. We belong to the earth. And our elders have always said that, we don't own land because we belong to the land. We don't own it, and that's where we all got into trouble now with who was here first and who owns the land. We never had those concepts because we recognize that relation that the earth can live without us. The water doesn't need us. The butterflies don't need us. All of these beautiful things that surround us don't need us to live, but we need them. So when we talk about that relation, and it's all relational and respect, then we can really start thinking about it in a different way. Well, yeah, that's right. I wouldn't be here. I'm 90% water. I wouldn't be here without the water, right? So we have to look at the water as a new thing. This is our parent. This is our mother. This is the one that sustains us. And stop exploiting her. Stop creating fields of pain, we call them, fields of pain. Because in doing that, we only do that to ourselves, and we do it to others. We do it to others here that deserve to live in peace as well. So I think that message that was part of this film was really important, especially with the kids. The kids that's a heavy subject for kids to really think about. But if we do it in a conversational way that, with that joy and hope that we can do this, and we have done this, because we have, that's something we can change in a generation. It only takes one. So it only takes one to take care of the 7 ahead of us. And I always remind everybody that you are somebody's 7th generation. You are the hopes and prayers of your ancestors before you. So what would they be saying to us now? Look at the mess we're in, right? Change it. Mm-hmm. Don't sit around and cry, but change it. And how do we do that together? So the best way forward, I think, is sort of this awareness. I love the awareness. I love the education. I love the art, which is so important in touching the hearts and minds of people. So I'm very thankful for your efforts and your work here.
Thank you thank you for sharing all of that. And I have 9 follow-up questions, and we're going to extend this panel out to, I think, 11:30 or midnight tonight, so we can get through all of this. Just as one quick question, the Greta quote was about being at a crossroads. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's actually based on a prophecy that we hold here. And in fact, it's one I always call it a pan-Indian prophecy. And it's not just here, we see it in other cultures across the world. But particularly, that's one that the Lakota and the Anishinaabe share, is that we would eventually see, we saw the coming of the colonists, we saw the sort of degradation of the earth, and that we would come to a time when we had to make a decision on how to live. And that's exactly how it's stated. We have to decide how to live. And when we say that, it's kind of a different concept. It's not necessarily like your everyday moving forward, driving our cars or whatever. We refer to that how to live as in how do we live in a good way with the earth? Because that's the only way to live that's sustainable.
So I want to jump from there into a question for the whole panel, and it came up in the Facebook feed, and I'm asking this because I think it really, because this panel is, we do have such limited time together, that this is like really deep into the heart of this conversation. And that was a question from Linda, who says, degrowth of what specifically? Population, gross national product, the economy. And then I'm called to mind part of Stephanie's commentary about making sacrifices of comfort and of life ways, because it's a rejection of a mythology of unending growth. So can we talk about what is degrowth? How does it fit into what we just experienced with this video, and what does it mean to you all? Stephanie, please. Oh, Stephanie, I'm sorry, you're muted. Go ahead and unmute one more time.
Oh, such a Luddite. Well, it means learning to share smaller pies. And I stole that from an old appropriate technology genius, Tom Bender. Degrowth of all of the above, our consumption, our extension into so-called vacant lands, the human population, and that degrowth is something that can be accomplished to the benefit of women and children, and fairly quickly. It doesn't have to be a coercive thing. But the trouble is that it's a very hard platform to run on. I mean, this is a tough sell because it means changing the way we live. Gandhi said, there's enough on earth for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. And to meet need is that's subsistence, and where my imagination fails is seeing this 72-year-old lady subsisting, on what comes to hand. Although I see people around living, more modestly and more productively here and there, and harking back to subsistence cultures. But there is a conversation about degrowth beginning in economic circles. It's not impossible, but it's kind of a taboo that needs to be broken. And you go first. That's all I got.
I mean, Jamie Delp talking about collective imagination, and we've just very recently experienced the power of imagination in the form of conspiracy theory, and how it became an existential threat to our democracy. And I know that the environmental movement, for my entire experience with it, has been, let's educate people, or let's captivate people with a message. Now we have a culture that is perhaps more deeply divided in its ability to be educated or captivated in a way that brings us together. Let's just wrestle with like every major problem here in the next 12 minutes. Talk to me about engaging the collective imagination.
Sure, thank you. I think that this will lead back to the idea of collective imagination, but I'm still kind of pondering the idea of degrowth, and the degrowth of what. And I think also to kind of build on where Stephanie was going with this. To me, it's always I've always thought about this as a process that begins internally, I guess. The degrowth of ego, the degrowth of greed. Stephanie was talking a lot about greed. The idea that we need to create space within ourselves. We need to declutter, in a sense, the degrowth of that ego, the degrowth of that greed, so that we can begin to really hold space inside of ourselves for the natural world. And I think it's a really symbiotic relationship once that starts to happen, where the more reverence you begin to have for the world, the natural world around you, you start to think about things like, where is my food coming from? When I have a need, is that really a need, or is that a want? Where am I purchasing my needs from? What does it come packaged in? And once we start to quiet our egos a bit, and quiet the side of ourselves that has been very conditioned by a culture of consumerism, then I think that we begin to find our imagination speaking a bit more clearly and loudly. And that inspires perhaps a film like the one that we just saw. I spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, but then how do you create change? Once you've begun this process, or you're thinking about these things, then what? It doesn't take just one person or 10 people. It's going to take everybody to turn this around, and now, unquestionably now. So how do we do that? How do we create a collective imagination in a world that is, as you were saying, Brad, intensely divided? And so for me, one of the answers, the way that I know how to begin approaching doing that is art. Until something is personal, I don't know if people are going to do anything until it's personal, until they feel it, until it touches their lives. And if we're not feeling it already, if we don't act quickly and collectively now, we're going to feel it. And it's going to be as dark and haunting as this film. But I think that once enough of us start thinking about our relationship to the land, our relationship to the earth, creating more space inside of ourselves to be in a more symbiotic relationship, then we can start creating from that. And when you can show another person something, you can share something that you've created so that there's an image there, there's a feeling there, we can see it, we can really imagine it, then that starts to grow and multiply in a way that I think is incredibly hopeful and incredibly powerful. And it looks like collective imagination. It looks like a lot of human beings who have more space inside of themselves to realize that until we really love the earth and the land, how can we possibly really love each other? Until we can really begin to love ourselves, let alone one another. So that's maybe a long answer to thoughts about degrowth and collective imagination and art. as a whole.
And you talk, so you mentioned hope, and some of the organizations we approached about helping to bring this video out said it's not hopeful enough. We need calls for hope and action. And so that hope has kind of always been a part of how you have, as Stephanie said, how do you run on that platform? How do you sell this piece? Because if you're not able to build that hope in, it's hard to get traction. And yet we are talking about, so Holly Bird in the chat here, which we can see on the panel, says the earth will make that choice for us if we don't, which raises a question too that Carol mentioned on Facebook, which is just simply why is this called plague phase? And maybe Joe or Anne Marie, you can take that on and speak about how William Reese thinks about hope or despair or our relationship to our impact on the planet.
I'll just answer briefly, and then I want Joe to step in here because he knows a lot more about the technical part about this. But William Reese talks about plague phase as the point at which regenerative capacity is no longer possible. And it's actually a mathematical point where in economy, it's, you can't recoup. And that becomes in this article projected onto, of course, everything else. And I think my sensibility about it is, and I hate saying this, but I think we'll have to be in the thick of it. It'll get worse before it gets better, before people will begin to awaken in a deeper way. We're starting to do that. And I think Jamie is so right. The art is what makes it personal and begins to help it grow. And Holly's words are comforting, and Stephanie's too. But I think the darkness will have to be darker before we really understand what plague phase means. And so, Joe, why don't you take it from there?
I'd encourage everyone to look around for William Reese's work. Bill Reese is an economist, a very learned man, and can be difficult to understand, but he's written a number of things that are understandable and is on YouTube and a lot of interviews. He wrote the article that was titled Plague Phase last year, actually 2 years ago. And he, of course, as an economist, was explaining to us that economy is actually a story we tell ourselves. It's something that we have defined through our language and our processes we can retell that story, and that's kind of the place we are going with that. His article is very difficult. He does, as Anne-Marie mentions, say it appears that we're going to need a serious shock to break us free from the thinking that we have, which is dominated by material growth and extractive economy. And so he was a little dark, and I think that's where the title Plague Phase comes from, foreseeing a little too much. But it's important, I think, to take stock, and that's kind of what we were trying to do in our little artistic way.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for explaining that. And I'm thinking back to the James Baldwin quote that I started the presentation with about white people sacrificing all the beauty of their lives as a way to avoid the reality of death. And I want to talk, both Leslie and Seth, particularly Jamie, you raised the power of art in this, and I'm trying to figure out what that really means. Like, how do we go into the darkness in a way and confront the physical realities of what's happening, and have artists lead the way for us?
I'll jump in there if that's okay. Because honestly, I think a big part of it is as a film teacher, someone who teaches film history and knows a lot about American film history. I think it's kind of goes back to the notion is that we have to be lifting up voices that haven't had voice in those realms enough. Because honestly, if we continue to see the same stories and the same people and the same faces and this, and we continue to have these stories that perpetuate this idea of the American dream, where you are supposed to work and then you get your rewards, and money is the goal and things are the goal. So, a big part of it, I think, is giving voice to artists, artists of color, Indigenous artists that are going to be able to tell the stories that, again, can still connect with people, very much so. Are still going to find that your empathy and connect, and that's actually just as important for something like, what Plague Phase is trying to do in the conversations that we're having, to have those voices. We need to have those voices in everything, in popular culture and everything. So I think it's really, again, up to us, up to me to help do that in whatever small way. When I teach film history, it's amazing to me how even in the history books, certain voices, certain filmmakers that are incredible filmmakers are just forgotten about, because you only see the same people, the same artists. And so, I have to make that effort to bring those people to light. So I kind of see that connection there. I'll pass it over to Seth.
Yeah, thanks. Great food for thought from everyone here. Honored to be in your company. Yeah, it's a lot. These are the conversations we need to be having, right now. So many different touchstones tonight, just in the Zoom follow-up. And I think that art and creativity is it's right there at the center of our lives with water. Like, you take it away and we shrivel up and become like nothing, and or we're left to our darker tendencies as human beings, and we've brought ourselves to the brink even with art. So we just need art. We need art. Kids need art. Everybody is an artist. Everybody has powers of creation at our disposal. The children in our lives remind us of that, because they, at certain ages are just so free with their creative expression. And I notice that, my own child, when she's in a world of creativity and imagination, when she's in that flow, it's like this construct of materialism doesn't even enter the picture, and so I think that all of us are facing this point of reinvestigating cultural values. All of us are. And, for Indigenous communities, the cultural values have been there and run very deep. And for those of us that are struggling with this construct of whiteness that, brings with it some pretty messed up cultural values. America has created blues and jazz music, right? These are the great cultural contributions to the world. But then we also have perpetuated this culture that is dealt with in the film, where it's sort of like this highly impractical style of unlimited growth and insatiable appetites. And it's not meaningful. It's not fulfilling. But if we get captured by a song or a painting or a poem in the middle of the day, that's meaningful to us. So all of us get to participate in that. And when I work with groups of people who don't have previous experience with music, sometimes I use this expression, musicking, where all of us can participate in musicking from different perspectives. Obviously, as a musical practitioner, my work doesn't have relevance unless there are music lovers participating in the process with me. And so I think that providing tools for creative practice to young people is such a important place to go with some of the energy that can be can sort of invoke a trauma response, as we voraciously research, just how serious it is right now in in ecological terms. And so, yeah, we live on stories, and we live out stories that other people made up for us. And so now it's time to come together with the powers of creativity and imagination, and lean into some better ways. And I do think that is part of the story of paradigm shift. I've come to understand that when paradigms shift, enough of us really boldly step into the new story, and a lot of people cling to the old story, and things get very messy, and we're right in the midst of all of that right now. So I think it takes courage to live the new story, talk about the new story, be the new story, and to not let fear sort of pull us down into this undertow from the old story.
I would love to jump in on this because I do have some thoughts on this, and we always say that we're in that eighth fire, and we do have this possibility, and that's also been seen, in our prophecies, that we do have a beautiful future if we want it. The one thing that I always go back to is some of you may have read the book 100 Circles, based on the 100 Monkeys. It's sort of the creation of hive minds when you get enough people to follow a thought process or do something together. And then suddenly, spontaneously, more people around the world, more beings around the world start doing that. And there's actually science that supports that. So if we all started working and kept working collectively together to create these futures, and we do have the technology, that's the thing. A lot of our industry is behind environmental degradation. But we now have what we call green factories out there. Hero HCC, which is based in India, has learned how to totally reduce its reliance on fossil fuel emissions, recapture any of their output, and use it for energy for the factory. In fact, they installed that same utility in a Ford plant and saved them $30 million a year. And then got their emissions to zero in some cases. So we have the technology, and it's up to us to know that that's there, to imagine it, and for creatives to put it out there. We need to imagine these futures in a positive light so that the people around us can see this is possible. And I want to relate back to my own experience at Standing Rock, where we lived, in tents in the middle of nowhere. It was like in the middle of fields. There were no trees, and we had a water source, but we did rely on some things brought in, but essentially we had to all take care of each other for warmth, for water, for food, and sanity, and, medical care. And it was very, it was very camp-like. And everybody that I know that went there, at least during the warmer parts of the year, said it was the most alive and healthy they ever felt. And I felt the same thing. I was there for a week, and I felt more energetic than I had in 10 years, just because I was subsisting. So our idea of subsistence versus happiness, those things need to be, the fear of subsistence needs to be taken out of that. So yes, we might lose some things that we think are comfortable, but we gain in other ways. So those are the futures that we need to show people, in our creatives, in their songs, and in their poetry, and in their films and art, that can show people that, and especially our children. So if they can grow up in those ideas, and we spread those circles, eventually it's not going to seem alien anymore. So I know we can do it.
What a perfect way to wrap all this up. Thank you, Holly. I wish we had so much more time to spend with all of you. But thank you for taking the time, both those of you that pre-recorded the commentary, and then for all of you to join us to process this a little more with all the folks who have been watching and commenting. Leslie, Alicia Ty, Joe Vandermeulen, Holly T. Bird, Seth Bernard, Anne-Marie Oman, Stephanie Mills, and Jamie and Delp. Thank you for being with us.
And Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
Brad Kick. Thank you so much.
A quick note, you're absolutely welcome. This was such an honor and a joy to be working with you all on this. A quick note for the folks who are still watching. This is not one and done. This will be, it's all been recorded, and we're going to put it on the Traverse City community media station. It'll also be available on the Crosshatch website. Joe, I'm not sure if Nature Change will host it, but it'll also stay here on Facebook, and it'll be on YouTube as well.
Yes, you can get it on Nature Change as well.
So great. So plenty of places for folks to access the entire recording. Also, it'll be easy to just find, if you just want to watch Plague Phase without having to get through all the introduction, that'll be available as well. And we'd love to hear continued comments from folks who are out there and keep this conversation moving forward. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great night.
Good to hang out virtually with wonderful folks.